In the early 1800s, the label of serial killer didn't exist. The murder of one person would send the country into a frenzy, much less the murder of multiple people. That said, in this video, we're going to the extreme end of that spectrum. To a man so sinister he built a castle specifically designed to kill people in the most gruesome ways you can imagine. Today, we are looking at America's first serial killer, HH Holmes. Herman Webster Mudgett, born on the 16th of May, 1861, in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. The third of three children, born to his parents who had immigrated from England in the early 1800s. During his early years, Herman was known as a bright and curious boy and had a knack for trapping rodents and dissecting their bodies. At the age of 16, Herman graduated from school and began working as a teacher in the local area. He was 17 when he married Clara Loverling, and 2 years later, their son Robert was born. But he wasn't satisfied with teaching, and at the age of 21, Herman enrolled in medical school at the University of Michigan. He graduated just 2 years later, after passing all of his exams. By all accounts, Herman was an average medical student, but during his studies, he had shown a particularly keen interest in human dissection. He appeared to be quite skilled at it, given his experience as a child. But there was limited availability of cadavers to practice on, and so Herman and his professor thought up a sly plan to get the bodies they needed. Under cover of darkness, the two would visit local graveyards and search for the most recently disturbed earth, indicating a body had just been buried there. They would dig up the remains and conceal their crime before taking the bodies back to their laboratory for dissection. But Herman wasn't only interested in dissecting the remains. Over the years, he had become a cunning con man, and he used the dead bodies as part of an insurance scam to get money to pay for his studies. He would take out life insurance policies on non-existent identities, with his name as the sole benefactor. Then he would present the dead bodies as the remains of the policyholder and claim the payouts in their name. After Herman completed his degree, he moved from job to job and state to state, while a trail of suspicious disappearances and insurance frauds began to follow him. It all started in New York, where a young boy disappeared after last being seen with Herman. Herman denied any involvement, but within days of the disappearance, he moved to Pennsylvania. But soon after arriving, a young boy died after taking medicine Herman had given him. Again, he denied any connection to the boy, but days later Herman left the city and moved to Chicago. Just before arriving there, he changed his name to Holmes, going by the title Dr. HH Holmes to avoid the suspicion that was chasing him. He left his first wife and their son behind and married another woman using his new name. It was only here in Chicago that he finally found a place where his murderous desires could be brought to life. Herman took up a job at a pharmacy where, by all accounts, he was a diligent and reliable worker. But behind closed doors, Herman was still carrying out his elaborate insurance scams. Within a couple of years, Herman had enough insurance money to buy the pharmacy after the owner died unexpectedly. Soon after, he bought a plot of land across the road from the pharmacy and built what would come to be known as his murder castle. He erected a large building with many bedrooms, which he rented out as short-term accommodation, like a modern-day bed and breakfast. On the ground floor was a series of shop fronts, intended to disguise the true nature of what lay beyond the walls. Over time, he built up a vast collection of lab equipment and used an elaborate layout of secret passageways, fake walls, and trapdoors to conceal his death chambers. In these chambers, he housed a dissecting table, a stretching rack, and a large incinerator, which was the perfect size to fit a human body. Though Herman declared it was just to burn trash from his home and workplace. His first confirmed victims were Julia and Pearl Smythe, the wife and daughter of a man who worked at the pharmacy Herman now owned. Herman had been having an affair with Julia, and when her husband found out, he left the city. Julia moved into Herman's home across the street with Pearl. On Christmas Eve of 1891, the pair disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again. In 1893, the World Fair was held in Chicago, and hundreds of thousands of visitors descended upon the city. Many young women came to stay in his castle during this time, renting rooms from him for accommodation. They believed they were going to be provided a safe, warm bed during their visit. Instead, Herman seduced them with promises of marriage and money before he turned on them. They were merely pawns in his murderous scheme, and he stole not only their money, but also their lives. He convinced many of his victims to sign over their life savings before he brutally murdered them, using their bodies to satisfy his dark fantasies. But even when they were dead, the women were still of use to him. He sold the skeletons of his victims to local medical schools for use as anatomy specimens for students. So, how was he caught? In 1893, one of the insurance companies Herman had scammed grew suspicious of a fire at the castle, which Herman had claimed a payout for. They began to consider the possibility of a scam and sent a private investigator to look into Herman's dealings. As the investigator closed in on him, Herman convinced a friend named Ben to fake his own death so they could jointly claim a life insurance payout. But instead of faking the man's death, Herman killed Ben and collected the insurance. Ben's wife was aware of the scam and believed Herman when he told her that Ben was safe and well and was hiding until the insurance was paid out. He gave the wife some money from the payout and convinced her to let her older children travel with him. In truth, Herman was on the run from the insurance investigation. He was convinced the children would turn him over to the police when they found out their father wasn't coming home. And so, he murdered them, locking them in traveling trunks and administering gas through a hole he had drilled on the top. He buried their naked bodies in a home he was renting. It was these murders that eventually led to Herman's undoing. He was arrested on suspicion of theft and insurance fraud. But as investigators looked closer, they realized he was involved in something much, much worse. They soon discovered the murder of Ben, and eventually the remains of the man's 3 children. They questioned Herman, and to their surprise, he quickly confessed. But not only to Ben and his children's murders, Herman claimed to have killed no less than 27 people. When the investigators looked into the names of his victims, there were a number who were well and truly alive. Even in his confession, Herman continued with his trickery. I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer. No more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. In May 1896, Herman was hanged at Moyamensing Prison. In a cruel irony, his neck didn't break, and he was strangled to death slowly over 15 minutes before being pronounced dead. Herman requested that his coffin be contained in cement and buried no less than 10 feet deep into the ground, so robbers couldn't steal his remains, as he had done to so many corpses before. In a strange twist, a rumor began to spread that Herman had escaped execution, and a stranger was killed in his place. After the rumor gained publicity, an order was made to exhume his body to re-identify his remains. His coffin was pulled from the ground, and given it had been completely entombed in cement, his remains were almost wholly intact, with even his mustache still visible. The body was identified as belonging to Herman due to his teeth. Despite his grand claims, it's still unclear exactly how many people Herman killed during his life. While many bodies were found under his murder castle, it's believed there are many that he discarded in other locations. This not only gave him the reputation as one of the worst serial killers in the world, but America's first serial killer.